Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first session of Dynavistics webinar series. My name is Stephen Phelps, and I'm the marketing director here at Dynavistics. Today, we have invited Lisa Curl and Steve Erickson to walk you through the functionality differences between Microsoft Dynamics GP and Acumatica. In this session, we'll be focusing on three main items: SmartLists, SmartConnect, and Integration Manager. We know many of our GP clients rely heavily on these tools, and we want to show you a functionality comparison across both platforms. Please note before we begin, Steve from our team is having some weather issues, so if we need to wrap up early, then we'll send the recording of the rest of the webinar. In addition, this webinar is in listen-only mode, so if you have any questions, then feel free to type them in the chat box, and we'll answer near the end of the presentation. With that said, I will now hand things over to Lisa.
Thanks, Steve. So today I want to introduce you to the ease of Acumatica's generic inquiries. Generic inquiries will be a home for legacy GP SmartLists. If you're using either the SmartList Designer native to GP or the SmartList Builder by E1, generic inquiries provides that functionality. Let's first look at the UI of the two SmartList tools, concentrating on the logical concept that you select the source data, included the needed database relationships, some filters, etc., and the fields that you have to present in your list. So on the left-hand side, you can see the designer and the database view and some selected fields. On the right-hand side is the SmartList Builder, a little bit more graphical, but again, showing all the fields and what is going to be displayed in your list. The equivalent home in Acumatica is generic inquiries. You can see on the UI of generic inquiries that the logical concept is pretty much the same, that you have to select your source data, have some relationships, maybe some parameters and conditions, and the results grid where it's giving you the fields to choose some. But the generic inquiry powers up what is available in SmartList. So the best way to really show you that is by presenting it in Acumatica with a typical story. We don't want this to be training, so it's going to be real quick for me, but I want to highlight the depth of the Acumatica platform. So let's press hands-on in Acumatica. So our story is, and on the right-hand side, you can see a very small screenshot of the generic inquiries. So we're going to take a bigger look at that in a minute. But the controller requested a list for open AP bills. You presented them with the option of the bills and adjustments list, but different information is needed. So here's the bills and adjustments list. And most of the desktop transactions and functions and spaces in Acumatica, the backbone are the bills, are the generic inquiry lists. So the required changes from this is only the open bills, because you can see, if you can see real small, it's giving you open and closed. We want to add the due date and remove some fields that aren't needed. We need some input parameters so he can select the due date range, ability to navigate to the vendor profile, because there's no way to navigate to the vendor profile from here. Highlight the rows for documents with an open balance over 100,000. Sort the results by vendor ID and then by document due date. Then make that list available in Excel and on a mobile device. And then also lastly, provide a pivot table from this data and also put that pivot table on the controller dashboard. So let's go ahead and look at that in Acumatica. And on my screen, you should see the Acumatica desktop. I'm signed in as admin, and I'm sitting at a dashboard that's the landing page for the admin user ID, which is a customer view. We're going to navigate to the dashboard for the controller and show you that a bit later. But let's go to the original request was list for the open bills. So I'm going to go to the bills and adjustments transaction screen. Again, the majority of these transaction screens underlying the delivery of that list is a generic inquiry. So what we can do is we can use this as a base, because it was pretty good. It just needed some revisions that the controller asked for. So you're able to go ahead and customize that by editing the generic inquiry. It brings us up to the generic inquiry designer. And when the designer is there, I can simply take a snapshot of that. So I can copy this, and within the clipboard, I can say new, type in an inquiry title, and then paste it. In the interest of time, it's only giving me about 12 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and pull open one that I've already started design process with and walk you through what I did. So this was a copy of the bills and adjustments generic inquiry that I made the necessary modifications to. So the first request was to only see open bills. So I added that condition to only see open bills. So when I delivered my conditions, I inactivated or removed from being active the old ones. I could have also deleted them, but I just left them in place. Then I added, by adding a row, another field for that status of open. So I found my field, I found my condition, and then I added my condition from the schema. Oops, I removed that checkbox. It was only open. Then another condition, we're going to look at this due date, but we wanted a condition to pick from due date parameters. So I had to add parameters since parameters didn't exist. So in the parameters, I had to add parameters, and I just added due date from, due date to, gave them a display name, and said they were going to be based on the AP due date field. And again, you can pick this from the list. I also gave it some default values. Then I went back to the conditions, added another row that said, yes, the invoice due date has to be between my new parameters that I'm going to allow the user to input. If we go to the results grid, we can see all the fields that based on our data source and relations that are delivered to us. So I can have those active or inactive and whether I want them to be visible. So one of the things that was needed was to go ahead and navigate to the vendor profile from that screen. So I went up to the data field, I selected the navigate, and it's going to navigate to the vendor profile. Also needed was the document balances. If they're over 100,000, I want them to go ahead and display in yellow the rows. So you can go to the document balance and add what's called a row style. So in the row style, there's one in here. I added it, and we'll walk through how easy that was. It pops up a form when you do a row style, and it's very much like Excel syntax. So I knew that I needed a function for it, and I knew I needed the if function. So I just double clicked and got my if function in there, and then I can walk through the syntax. So this was the expression that I know that I needed a field for that, for this expression. So I'm going to find the document balance, that document balance. Then I know that if it's true, whoops, back through the condition, if it was greater than 100,000. Then if it was greater than 100,000, I know I wanted to do a style for this true part. So I went to styles and I this true part. And I could type these in here, but it's easier to just highlight the field and say yellow, get rid of the X or T. And for false, I wanted it to be the default value. So I'll just go ahead and put default. So when that was in there, I'll just get rid of that. It's a redundant duplicate. I just validate it, make sure it passes syntax, say okay. So that takes care of my rows that are going to be highlighted in yellow. Next, I needed a sort. So I simply went to the sort tab, added the requested sort order, which was by account name, and then by due date. And then I knew that the list had to be available on a mobile device and Excel. So I said yes, ticked on, made active, the exposed to mobile application, and also to the OData, which makes it visible and to Excel and other applications like Power BI. So after that, I went ahead and I just viewed the inquiry to make sure the inquiry had the results that I wanted. And it looks good. I now have a pop up to the vendor that it brings the vendor profile to look. I have only status of open. I have due date parameters, so let's check that out. It defaulted to the ones I had as my default. Let's make sure that works. It now has the parameter that I need. Let's send it back. It's sorted right by vendor and by due date, and it is ready to go. So the last thing needed was a pivot table from the data. So I can do that by going to the results from that inquiry and adding a pivot table. So then the designer for the pivot table, and again, it looks very similar to Excel. I added a new one. I gave it the ID, no surprise. I called it the same, gave it a little title so I can find it by open bills by vendor. And I took my fields and I just drag and dropped them. So I know on the rows I wanted vendor, mine was very simple. I wanted vendor name and the values was just the balance. And then I can go ahead and view the pivot results to make sure that also has what I need. And I go down, let's just take a look at this one. I know has multiple, so make sure my drill down's working. And yes, it delivers the details back to the open bills that was created. So that looks good. The next thing I need to do is everything looks good to me. I need to save them and publish them to the UI. So to do that, you just simply hit publish to the UI, and that's going to make it available in the workspaces and to other users if you select that. So when it publishes to the UI, I give it a name. I give it a name and where I want it to publish in the UI. Give it a name where on the workspace, which I put it in my data views. I could have put it right under payables if I wanted, and to the inquiries category of the data views. And you can copy some rights over. So I did that for both the generic inquiry and also for the pivot table has the very same thing. So now to access those, I said I wanted them under data view. So I have a couple different ways to go there. So I can see them under data view now. Open AP bills. It's there. Under data views, my pivot table is also available to me. If I favorite them both, they're also available in my favorites. I can also, if I was somewhere else, type in AP open spelling counts, and I have my open bills and open bills by vendor. So that pretty much gives me the navigation I need, and they're available in the UI. The last request was to put the pivot table on the controller dashboard. So let's visit the dashboards. If you were with us in our last webinar, we talked a little bit about these. I'm going to go straight into the controller's dashboard. That is where their request is. And this controller's dashboard, access to the dashboards are role driven. And you can see these little spinning circles. It's refreshing. This controller dashboard, these widgets are configured to refresh on opening. So the first time it's cached, it's refreshing them all at the same time. But you can see that it has a lot of different widgets from a lot of different information. I can simply put this into design mode. And then you can see how I can change colors, move things around. But what I need to do is add that pivot table. You have an unlimited amount of widgets that you can put on these dashboards. So if I add a new widget, you can see the different types, charts, data tables. That could have been the inquiry list, the AP list, but the request was for pivot table. Embedded pages, I can do a header just as sort of dividers, some KPIs, links, pivot table, that's us. The Power BI tiles, if you were making a Power BI, trend card KPIs, and some wiki pages. So let's go back and add that pivot table. So I'm going to go add the pivot table. I'm going to find that inquiry screen that I know is the AP open bills. I don't know why I want to misspell that all the time. I'm going to also refresh that data on page load. And the pivot table is the AP open bills pivot table that I created from that inquiry list. And let's call this same thing, AP open bills. So let's finish that up. And I can see that it placed it in here, gave it a title. Let's go ahead and take it out of design mode and just make sure everything works. And if I go down, you can see, let's go to that one we visited before, the EastCom electronic. And if I do the drill down, it is functioning as expected. So I'm good to go, and I can deliver that back to the controller as finished. So that is all I have for you, and I'm going to hand it over for Steve. I hope I showed you how that SmartList can be replaced or reproduced in Acumatica, as well as how easy it is to do that. And there's a lot more that you can do with those generic inquiries, but I kept it very simple to base it off an existing simple SmartList. So Steve, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Now we're going to talk about integration or integrating with Acumatica. One of the things that the SmartConnect from E1 can do is assist you in creating integrations. And from what I understand, those of you who are using SmartConnect are predominantly importing and exporting flat file data. So whether you're using your browser or your mobile UI on your phone, or whether you're using integration services of any kind from anything, they are going to come in through an API. Now, Acumatica supports a couple different APIs. It uses a different API for its own web browsers than it does for integration services, but you are going to come in through an API. And what is an API? An API stands for Application Program Interface. API allows different pieces of software to communicate and exchange data. Now, this is the web version of ODBC. When you are in a legacy product installed on your network and you're trying to connect a report writer or you're trying to connect Excel into your GP data, you more than likely would do that through an ODBC. Now, you may have an application that shields the ODBC, but the connection is ODBC, Object Data Connected, whatever it stands for. But when you go to the web, ODBC is no longer a functioning tool, and the APIs take the place of ODBC. So the APIs, it says, allows different software to communicate. It's important to understand how SmartConnect works. It connects to Acumatica via the API. The API validates your login and the data being moved. And then you may have predefined API templates, or you may make one. And so a predefined template would be, say, a subset of the total API. But within Acumatica, we have something called import and export by scenario. So like the name implies, import and export scenarios are predefined mappings that allow for management of data originating from outside of Acumatica, an import, or originating from inside of Acumatica and needs to be shared, an export. Although these tools are critical components of an implementation of Acumatica, i.e., that is how we move your data from GP into Acumatica, they can be scheduled to execute at certain times throughout the day to allow for the reoccurring maintenance of data. Important scenarios can be used to update data as well. There are more than 90 predefined import scenarios within Acumatica, and additional ones can be created as necessary. There are more than 30 export scenarios, and additions of those can be created as necessary. So if you are using SmartConnect to import a flat file off of your website of orders, you can then use import by scenario to do that same function. Now, I'm going to show you import and export by scenarios. I'm not going to import orders, but I'm going to show you something off of the predefined templates that are there. So let's go take a look at that. So I'm going to go over to Acumatica, and I'm actually going to start over. Up here. Off, sorry. We're going to log out and log back in as the admin to just reset everything to back where we were, to the start of things. And we're going to drop in. Oh, it's going to drop into the last place I was. That's okay. So when we come in here, you type import. You can find your import by scenarios here. And if you type export, you will get the same thing. So here's your export by scenario. Notice that I have the little star highlighted here, where over here I do not. And that allows me to put it over on the favorites. And now I can come into import by scenario. So this import by scenario is the import of AP bills. It's what comes up by default when you select this one. If we had a different file underlying this, it would update it. This file has been uploaded and already Acumatica, so it's going to show you that it is, we're going to replace the data if we rerun this. And so there are 124 records in here. We have it set to break on error. And what that is, when you are importing data, if you have a field that is not quite right, a date field or a document number that's duplicated, and the system doesn't like it, most systems will simply break and send you an error that says, on line 23, you have an error. Doesn't tell you what the error is. In Acumatica, it will highlight the error. You'll get a red dot over here on the left, and you will get a yellow field where the error is. And this makes it very easy to find those problems with an import file, correct them, and finish importing that data out. So this is import by scenario. And as it said, there are some 90 predefined imports in here, including things like going in and out of HubSpot or going in and out of other applications on the web that you may already be using, time inputs, etc. So you can select any of those predefined inputs, or in a minute, I'll show you how you can create your own version of an import-export by scenario. But for right now, we're going to go back up to favorites, and we're going to go to export by scenario. So the same concept, except now I'm sending data out. I'm going to jump down and say I want to export customers, and it's already been selected. It knows where the customers are, so it's going to grab the list of customers and make it available for you to export. Now, this has already been processed, and you can come up here to the files and see the file that has been exported, all customers. You can create a link and send it to someone, or you can download it to your local machine. And if you download it to your local machine, this is what you're going to get. So here is an Excel sheet of all the information for the customer's name and a whole variety of other things. And you can take this data or subsets of this data and send it to MailChimp or send it to your CRM system or some other system that maybe needs this data. You can also take this file and subset it down to the customer number and let's say just the billing set. And then you can update the billing sets and import it, and that will then update the customer's billing set to whatever you went ahead and imported in there. So that is exporting by scenario. But now let's go back and type here export again, and we get export scenarios. This is where you set up the scenario that a user is running. So we're going to go ahead and open the customer scenario, and you can see here that all of the fields in the customer are here. Customer summaries for customer ID and account name and terms ID and a whole variety of different fields. We're coming from billing addresses. We're coming from ship to addresses. We're coming through attributes that are attached to the customer file, and we are saying all of these. Over here, we are coming in and saying, our customer summary summarized by customer ID and other things. This whole screen, though, is designed for technical people to do. This is not designed for the end user. It is designed for technical people. That could be your IT team. That could be an internal person who writes Boolean logic or writes reports or does some minor programming. They're going to have the knowledge to understand this straight out of the box. A user can learn this, but that's not necessarily the best utilization. You want your technical people to create the templates and users to simply execute on them. Now, know that obviously we can do this work for you as well, as we may have done in the past with your Great Plains environment. We can do this as well in the Acumatica environment. So now it comes down to what lists are you doing? What integrations do you have? And what is the best way to handle that? We can use SmartConnect for Acumatica. We can uh, connect pop docs if we're going to do something like the Azure Data Lakes that they talk about on their website. We can use other tools within the Acumatica environment, such as iMan or other integration tools. But first and foremost, we should look at the tools that are directly inside the application. And that's what we would do in a discovery session with you is what are you using to, what imports do you have? What exports do you have? What are you using to do those imports and exports now? And what is the best solution for bringing that structure forward into Acumatica? That's what we do during the discovery docs, and you can get those all mapped as part of a project. With that, I am going to end here and turn it back over to the host and say thank you.
Thanks, Steve. We actually did have one question that came in. You may have answered it already, but the question was, can we repurpose our current integration flat files to be received by Acumatica via the import by scenario instead of SmartConnect?
Yes. So depending upon well, your flat file is, we would take the flat file, we would identify where it needs to go, and then we would create a new import by scenario specifically for that flat file, name it appropriately, and then from that point on, you simply move your flat file into a location, and we can either through a timer or through a manual import execute on imports by scenario to bring that information into Acumatica.
Perfect. So based on time, we're just going to go ahead and wrap up. So thank you again for joining us today. If you guys do have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to email our director at lisa.curl@dynavistics.com. Our next session will take place at the end of July, so stay tuned for updates or reach out if there's any specific topic that you'd like us to cover. That wraps up today's session, so we hope you enjoyed our presentation and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.